All right. So Luke chapter 18, verses 1 through 8, you can turn there. And we'll just kind of pick up part 2 here. So Jesus, we said, gives 2 parables, one at the front end and one at the back end of this journey that he takes to Jerusalem with his students. And on the front end, he talks about the reason prayer makes sense, why it's as it were an intelligent approach to life. Okay, in terms of the character of the one that we're talking to. Okay, and so we saw last session that God's character, the guy inside the house, is a man of honor, a man who would avoid anything that was shameful, and because of that, he'll get up and do what's needed. And we also see that God has this kind of character of competent love, like a parent taking care of a child, but without any of the mixed motives that we experience in that ourselves. Now, so the character of God is the first kind of pillar of prayer, and the reason that it makes sense to do for a human being. But there's this kind of second element, and I want you to think about these as kind of 2 sides of a relationship, right? And so prayer is this interaction in which we come and we ask, okay? And we trust that God will give. Okay? And we've talked so far about the character of God. Is it possible to kind of break off this act that we engage in called asking or making request, and then to think about just that side of the equation? Okay, I think that's what Jesus does in this parable. Okay, he wants us to kind of think about what is prayer. What's its nature? What power does it have on its own? And I'm going to tell you, I'm just going to say this. Prayer fundamentally is request. Okay? Now, that's not to say that nothing else happens in the context of prayer, in the context of that interaction. Are there moments of adoration? Yes. Is there just kind of being there with the one that we've asked when there's nothing left to ask? Yes. Okay? But I want to say that the essence, right, like the thing without which prayer just isn't what it is, right, is request. Okay? It's asking. Now, I am aware that there are a lot of theologians who think that is a kind of childish thing to say, right? And there's this teaching that floats around, and maybe you've encountered it, that basically says it's okay, baby prayer, childlike activity is you go and you ask for things, but then eventually you grow up, and if you're really fully grown as a Christ follower, then you just come to God and you commune, you just bask, you marinate in His presence, and that's all there is, right? And I don't think that's right. I think that as crass as it feels at one level, we need to get comfortable with what's going on in this interpersonal interaction of asking and receiving, asking and giving, being asked and giving, that exchange. And so at one level, even if you just go back to kind of look at the most simple thing like grammar, okay, in the Lord's Prayer, every line from beginning to end, after the invocation, our Father in the heavens, right? After that, every line is in the imperative. It's asking, okay? And that includes sanctify your name, okay? Now, if he answers that then there will be a lot of praise and a lot of adoration that comes as a result of him answering it. But that request is not adoration. It's a request. Grammatically, it's saying, would you please do this? Okay? And so I think we have to get comfortable with this relation of coming, as it were, hat in hand and saying, God, we can't go without this. Would you please? At one level, that's just part of being a creature. Right? The second thing that I want to say, and that I think we'll see in these teachings of Jesus, is that God really does act. He really does give in response to our requests. Okay? And if I can just give you a phrase to think about, prayer is a form of causality. It's a way of making something happen. It's a form of effectiveness. Okay? Making things happen in the world. And again, this is contrary to a kind of stream of teaching that is out there. There's a certain form of teaching. I won't even name it. I'll just say there's a form of teaching that says that God, he kind of well, first of all, he's omniscient. He knows everything already. He reads minds. He looks through the future. He has this big picture plan underway, and it's been set from all eternity. And so because of that, God's going to kind of do whatever God's going to do, whether you ask him or not. Right? And so prayer isn't really about having anything change in the world or affecting what God's going to do. At best, it's a sort of self-therapy, and or maybe it's a command to do something that doesn't really, make any difference. Is it kind of like the cosmic equivalent to that button that you push at the crosswalk? And it's like, it's going to change at the same time whether you push it or not, but it just kind of keeps you occupied while you're waiting, right? And just to say that prayer is not that, okay? There are good things that God will not give if you do not ask for them. Okay? And there are bad things that God will not prevent if you don't ask him. Okay? That he actually engages in this world and alters what he's doing based upon our requests. Okay? Now, that has created all sorts of metaphysical problems for people through the ages, and that's okay. That's all right. This invitation to come into a relationship where we talk to God and we ask him to do things, it's an extension. It's one element of this larger thing that we were created for, called dominion. Okay? And so when you go back to Genesis 1, human beings are created to have say over this world below. And so we were, as it were, designed to be extensions of God's own rule here on earth. And he desires to shape what happens in this world through human beings. Okay? Now, we're going to talk about this more deeply tomorrow morning when we come to the Your Kingdom Come, Your Will Be Done section. But part of what this means is really that God delights in having this kind of indirect way of working through other people rather than doing everything directly by his own hand. Okay? And, this works at all sorts of levels, but you could think about it this way. When we wake up at 6 or 7 a.m. and pray for daily bread, he's had somebody up at 4 a.m. in the bakery, as an answer to that prayer, right? And he prefers, whenever possible, rather than just kind of like beaming down himself, to work, through one human for another in this world. And so God really likes to affect things through you and me. Okay, that's what that dominion is about. Okay, now prayer, request, is a basic form of that kind of effectiveness that we're given to have in the world. It's a way of making things happen that's appropriate between persons. Okay, for a relationship between persons, because the way that you change something in the life of another person can't be the way that you change something that's just inanimate, right? So, if you have a weed in your garden, it would be better to go pull it rather than pray for it to go away. Okay? You just put that in your power, right? And that's part of your dominion. It's already answered. If you don't want it there, do that. Okay? If you have a loved one who's addicted to drugs or struggling, with gender identity, or or in an abusive relation, okay, that you can't simply extract that person from. You see, you still need to have some dominion. You need to have some influence in this world. But that's the sort of thing it's too complex for my mind or yours, right? You better pray about that one. Don't try to pull that weed, right? Not, you can't just control it. You need to pray. And so request, prayer, is a way of making things happen that's appropriate between persons. Okay? Now, what Jesus does in this passage in Luke 18 is he tries to kind of detach that power of just asking, right, from the character that he's explained to be there, or kind of depicted in God at the beginning of this travel log. And it turns out that request by itself is quite effective. Okay, so chapter 18, verses 1 through 8. Jesus, as it were, he clarifies the power of request by making the scenario in this parable as far as possible different from the one that we have in there in chapter 11. So in chapter 11, it's all about the character of the person on the other side of the door, right? Man of honor, right? And then you have a parent, and there's competent love. What he does here is as kind of like a mental exercise, right? He says, okay, let's remove all of the character of God that we know to be there. Let's take away honor. Let's take away love. Let's erase all of that, and then just ask what's left of this act of making request, of prayer. All right? And so that's what we get in this story. Somebody want to read it for us real loud?
Then Jesus told his disciples a parable to show them that they should always pray and not give up. He said, in a certain town there was a judge who neither feared God nor cared about men. And there was a widow in that town who kept coming to him with the plea, "Grant me justice against my adversary." For some time he refused, but finally he said to himself, "Even though I don't fear God or care about men, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will see that she gets justice, so that she won't eventually wear me out with her coming." And the Lord said, "Listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? I tell you, he will see that they get justice, and quickly. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth?"
Thank you. Okay. So what he does here is he excises, he cuts out all of that character of God, right? And he describes a scenario in which you have this widow coming to a judge, and the judge is everything that a judge is not supposed to be in Israel. Okay? You can just kind of write it in the margin next to this passage. Look at some point, look up 2 Chronicles, chapter 19, verses 4 through 6. And what you have there are kind of instructions for setting up judges in the land of Israel. And you're told very specifically, find somebody that loves, that fears God, right? And because the one who fears God won't touch a bribe. Okay? And so what happens here is we have a depiction of the judge as one who, first of all, does not fear God. To not fear God means that a person has no real moral compass in life. Okay? One of the phrases that you have running through the Old Testament to talk about a people for whom there's no real consciousness of right and wrong is to say, there's no fear of God in this place. Okay? You could think about that this way. Fear is a way in which we register power and proximity to us. Okay? There could be somebody who's very, very powerful, but if you don't think that he knows where you're at, isn't going to do anything where you are, that power isn't something you would fear. The story I often tell is when I was a kid, me and my buddies used to make fun of Mike Tyson because he had this kind of squeaky high voice that was so, just out of proportion with his body, right? And he was amazing at the time. He'd get in and, he was having fights that lasted like 20, 30 seconds, very few people were even making it through the first round with him before he knocked him out. But we'd all make fun of him, right? Because he had this little high voice, right? And so we'd make fun of Mike Tyson. And we made fun of Mike Tyson for one reason and one reason only. He wasn't in the room. Right? Like I had no fear of Mike Tyson because he wasn't there. He was powerful, but he wasn't close enough for that to matter at all. Right? And so fear is how we register power in proximity to us. If you don't know that God is in the room, then you don't have any fear of God. Okay? And if you don't have any fear of God, there's not much of anything else to hold you back, right? And so a judge who doesn't fear God, there's nothing to appeal to there. It doesn't matter if it's right or wrong because he doesn't think that there's anything that would ultimately hold him accountable, right? And so this judge, he doesn't fear God. He also doesn't feel any shame. He says, I'm not embarrassed before men. I don't blush before men. So what that means is that even if somebody caught him in the act of doing something bad, it wouldn't matter to him, right? And so all of the things that you would appeal to in the character of this man in order to get justice are just missing. Right? And then the widow, she's in a rough situation. First of all, the fact that she's a widow means in the ancient world that she doesn't have anybody to be her defender. Right? She doesn't have a husband, she doesn't have a child probably who can go and intervene and stand on her behalf. And so she also lacks resources. Okay. And probably what's implied here by the fact that she's coming again and again asking for justice against an opponent is that this, since the judge is corrupt, and the opponent very well may have paid the bribe, right? And so everything is stacked against her in terms of the situation that she's in. She has absolutely nothing on her side. There's no social position, no money, no advocates, and then in the character of the person, there's nothing she can appeal to. She has nothing at all on her side except one thing. Whatever power there is in making a request. That's all that's there. Right? And it turns out that that's not nothing. Okay? There's actually a fair bit of effectiveness of power simply in the request itself. Now, and Jesus is kind of asking us to think about that as the second element of what goes in to prayer, for why we would have confidence in prayer. One way you could think about this is that asking and giving, responsiveness to request, it's something that's kind of built in to how this world is put together. And I really think that biblically, we should think about this as something like a law of the universe, okay? That actually, maybe it goes deeper than something like gravity and, the strong and the weak side of the electron and things like this, right? That it's kind of built in to the way that this world is put together, that persons are going to be inclined to give when they're requested. Okay? And I think that's because we live in a world that's created by this community of persons that we call the Trinity, Now, those are really big claims. Let me bring it down to something much simpler, and let me ask you just to consider your own experience. Okay? I know people, and you do too. You're probably not these people, because otherwise you wouldn't be here doing what you do. But I know people who, when they see a beggar on the side of the street up ahead, they will cross the street to go up so as to not walk past that beggar. Okay? Why? What's behind that? What do you think? Why does somebody do that? Okay. Yeah. So one level of it is doesn't want to give. But then there's the second thing. You could walk by and not give. So, you feel bad? What were you going to say?
I think it's hard, maybe like a sense of shame. You don't want to look that person in the face.
Yeah, that's good. There's something in that, in being asked, that it's impossible to not be affected by it, right? And that's why I want to say, it's a law of the universe. Like, you never ask without some effect. It doesn't mean that I have to give, but I have to harden myself if I don't, right? And that's one of the reasons that people will take extra measures to avoid the situation where they're asked, right? And it's a testimony to the power of asking. Okay. We do this also even like with our pets, like we teach them not to beg, right? And We had a dog that was pretty well trained for that until some of our friends kept them on we left on a, for furlough and came back, and our dog is ruined. And now she comes and she watches while you eat. And it's like something inside, you can't enjoy your meal and not give some, or kind of it's like, what's wrong with this thing, right? And so it's how we're put together that request brings with it an inclination to respond to it. Okay? Now, it also turns out that asking is a cumulative thing. Okay? Now, we teach our kids not to badger somebody, not to keep asking over and over, right? Why do we do that? Well, because we know that every time they ask, there's this tug inside, right? And so it's a way of being kind of kind to the other people, to say, don't pull too hard, right? But then when we have to decide if we're going to give their request, one of the ways we decide is on how often they ask us and for how long, right? They're just, we have the sense that if it really matters to them, even though we said no, they're going to come back and ask again, right? And so we kind of monitor in that way. And so there's a significant power just on that side of things. And so here in this parable, the woman, she comes just over and over and over and over and over again before the judge. And the judge, who has none of the character, no honor, no care, no love, none of that, nonetheless, is wearied just by the asking until he says, I'm going to give her justice. Right? And so Jesus then says, if this is how even an unjust judge, right, does it, how much more? So what you have to do is go back and now kind of bring back into this equation the God who is honorable, who has bound himself to be there when you cry out, the God who already wants what's good and out of limitless competence and love is seeking what is good for you. How much more will that one respond even quickly? Okay, but then he asks this question. So how much more will he give to those whom he's chosen, right? Who cry out to him day and night? He won't take long for them. And then he says, but I tell you, he'll bring justice to them quickly. But when the Son of Man comes, so when he acts, right? Will he find faith? Will he find, you could translate that trustworthiness, or reliability, or loyalty. All of those are built into that same sense. Will he find that in the land or on earth? Okay. One way you could say that is, will he find people still asking? Will he find people still asking? Okay. Okay. So these twin parables is how Jesus kind of brings together the conceptual undergirding of prayer. Okay. These are two understandings that when you bring them together, God's character and the power of asking in and of itself, when you bring those together, when you understand them, it suddenly kind of opens up where the only really intelligent way to approach human life is to approach it in an attitude of prayer to God. Asking for the good that we see missing and needed. Asking for his intervention, calling upon him. It becomes kind of the smart way to live. All right. I think I'll stop at that, and we will... I'll say this, and then we'll go to any Q&A we want here. these first two have been kind of focused on what is prayer, why bother with it. In the next session and on through the rest of the weekend, we're going to focus more on the how-to, right? And so we'll go we'll use Matthew's version, but we'll go to this model prayer that Jesus gives, and we'll go through it piece by piece and kind of unpack his teachings about prayer largely through that. Okay? So questions, comments?